For years, people whispered her name without knowing who she truly was. She was called Eklutna Annie, a name given not out of familiarity, but out of mystery. No one knew where she came from. No one knew her real identity. Yet her story would become one of the most haunting and heartbreaking cases in American criminal history. Sometime in the early 1980s, a young woman traveled to Alaska. She was believed to be in her late teens or early 20s, petite, and quiet. Witnesses later recalled that she appeared vulnerable, possibly struggling, yet hopeful, like someone trying to start over. Alaska, with its promise of opportunity and freedom, attracted many who were searching for something new. For her, it would become the place where her life ended. In April 1980, her body was discovered near the small town of Eklutna, Alaska. She had been left in a remote wooded area, far from busy roads, where silence stretched endlessly and help never came. The scene told investigators one thing immediately: this was not an accident. She had been deliberately brought there, abandoned, and erased. She had no identification. No missing persons report matched her description. No one came forward asking questions. Without a name, she became known simply as Eklutna Annie, a title that symbolized both her anonymity and the tragedy of being forgotten. Authorities examined every detail they could. She had distinctive features: a small scar on her chin, signs that she had once been pregnant, and injuries that indicated prolonged suffering. The evidence suggested that she had endured unimaginable cruelty before her death. Yet even with these clues, her identity remained a mystery. What made the case especially chilling was how calculated it appeared. Whoever harmed her had taken steps to ensure she would never be identified. She was left far from civilization. No belongings. No clues. It was as if someone wanted her to disappear completely, as if her life had never mattered. Investigators believe she may have been a hitchhiker or a young woman who trusted the wrong person. In Alaska during that time, hitchhiking was common, especially among young people trying to move between towns. It was easy to accept rides, easy to trust, and dangerously easy to vanish. The community reacted with shock and sorrow. Even without knowing her name, people felt the weight of what had happened. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone who once had dreams, fears, and a future. Yet she lay unidentified, her story cut short and unfinished. Years passed, and the case grew colder. Files were stored. Leads faded. Investigators retired. But the questions never went away. Who was she? Why did no one report her missing? Who took her life and why?
As time moved on, something unexpected happened. Advances in forensic science reopened doors that had long been closed. DNA testing offered a new chance, not just to find her killer, but to give her back her name. For the first time, hope returned to a case that had once seemed lost forever. But before justice could be served, investigators would have to face a terrifying truth. Eklutna Annie was not the only victim. Her case was connected to something much darker, a pattern of violence hidden beneath years of silence. And the man responsible was closer than anyone ever imagined. As the investigation into Eklutna Annie's death continued, detectives slowly began to realize that this case was not just about one unknown woman. The evidence, though limited, pointed towards something far more disturbing: a pattern. What initially appeared to be an isolated tragedy soon revealed connections to other missing women across Alaska. Investigators took a closer look at the timeline. The late 1970s and early 1980s were a dangerous time for vulnerable women in Alaska. Hitchhiking was common, shelters were limited, and many young women traveled alone. For someone with harmful intentions, the environment provided opportunity: long stretches of highway, isolated areas, and people who trusted easily. As files were reviewed, detectives noticed similarities between Eklutna Annie and other cases. Young women, no stable housing, last seen accepting rides, vanished without a trace. Some were later found in remote locations. Others were never found at all. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Slowly, a name began to surface: Robert Hansen. Hansen was a quiet baker who lived an ordinary-looking life in Anchorage. 2 neighbors. He appeared shy, reserved, and harmless. Few suspected that behind closed doors, he lived a double life built on control, fear, and violence. By the time investigators seriously examined him, years had already passed. Years during which multiple women had disappeared. Authorities began re-examining past encounters between Hansen and law enforcement. Records showed a troubling history. He had been arrested before for attacks against women, yet repeatedly released. Each time, the system failed to stop him. Each failure gave him confidence and more time. Witness statements started to align. Several women who survived encounters with Hansen described being taken to remote areas. Some spoke of threats, weapons, and terror. Their stories matched the condition and location where Eklutna Annie was found. The pieces were slowly coming together. When investigators finally searched Hansen's property, they uncovered chilling evidence. Maps marked with small symbols, locations that corresponded to where bodies had been found, and places where others might still be hidden. These were not random markings. They were trophies, records of violence carefully kept. It became clear that Eklutna Annie was one of many victims. She had not been targeted by chance alone. She fit a pattern: young, isolated, trusting, someone who could be controlled and erased without immediate consequences. Yet one painful truth remained. Despite identifying the killer, her name was still unknown. Families of other victims began to receive answers. Names were spoken again. Stories were reclaimed. But Eklutna Annie remained silent. Her identity lost to time. She was known only by where she had been found, not by who she truly was.
This lack of identity haunted investigators. They believed she came from outside Alaska, perhaps another state, perhaps another country. That made tracking her past even more difficult. No one had reported her missing in a way that matched. She had slipped through the cracks of society long before she lost her life. As Hansen's crimes became public, the community was shaken. People questioned how someone so dangerous could remain hidden for so long. How many warnings were ignored? How many chances were missed to stop him earlier? For Eklutna Annie, justice came in a partial form. Her killer was identified. His freedom was taken away. But something essential was still missing. Her name, her history, her voice. She was more than a victim, more than a case number, more than a nickname. She was a young woman whose life mattered, even if the world did not know her name. And that unanswered question would linger long after the courtroom doors closed.
Even after the killer was exposed and sentenced, one painful truth refused to fade: Eklutna Annie still had no name. The man responsible would never walk free again, but the young woman he silenced remained unidentified. Justice had punished the crime, yet it had not fully restored her humanity. Years passed, and investigators refused to give up on one final mission: to return her identity. Advances in forensic science offered new hope. What once seemed impossible was now within reach. DNA technology had evolved, allowing experts to trace genetic connections across databases, families, and generations. For the first time, there was a real chance that Eklutna Annie could finally be known as more than a nickname. Specialists carefully preserved what little evidence remained. Bone samples were re-examined. Genetic profiles were developed. The process was slow, expensive, and uncertain, but it carried enormous emotional weight. Identifying her would mean giving her back her story. It would mean that somewhere, a family could finally know what happened to the daughter they lost. The effort went beyond science. It became a moral responsibility. Her case came to symbolize something much larger than one crime. It represented countless unnamed victims, people who disappear on the margins of society, whose lives go unnoticed until tragedy strikes. Hitchhikers, runaways, women without stable homes, people whose absence does not trigger immediate alarms. Eklutna Annie reminded the world how dangerous invisibility can be. Communities reflected on how easily her life had been erased, how no one reported her missing, how no photograph circulated, how no name was spoken for years. It forced a difficult question: how many others vanished the same way without anyone ever knowing? Despite everything, her story endured. True crime investigators, advocates, and ordinary people continued to share her case, not for shock, but for remembrance. Every retelling kept her from being forgotten again. Every discussion reinforced the idea that a life without a name still deserves dignity. Eventually, genetic genealogy brought investigators closer than ever before. Family lines began to emerge. Possibilities narrowed. Though confirmation took time, hope grew stronger. Hope that one day, a real name would replace the placeholder she had carried for decades. Even without that final answer, Eklutna Annie's legacy changed how cases like hers were handled. Law enforcement began prioritizing unidentified victims. Databases expanded. Collaboration increased. Her case helped push the system forward, quietly but powerfully. Justice, in her case, came in layers. The man who harmed her was stopped. Other victims were found. Patterns were exposed. Failures were acknowledged. And most importantly, she was remembered. Eklutna Annie was not just a victim of violence, she was a victim of silence. A silence that allowed harm to continue unchecked. A silence that erased identity. Breaking that silence became her final form of justice. Her story stands as a warning and a promise. A warning about what happens when society looks away. And a promise that even after decades, truth can still rise. She mattered. Her life mattered. And she will not be forgotten.